So welcome to Inspiral Out Loud, where we are exploring different ways of creating a thriving future for all sentient beings. So today we've got a slightly different format. I thought this would be a beautiful way to get a few people together. Normally on this platform, I'm interviewing other people, but today we're talking about fear. And I've kind of got a lot of experience with fear. So I thought that this would be a good opportunity to have a little bit of a group chat. So for the next half hour, I'm mainly going to be talking, and then we'll be getting into a few different exercises and some cute questions and answers and things like that a bit later on. So first of all, thank you everyone for being here on our first ever Zoom group session for Inspiral Out Loud. So really thankful and grateful to everybody for being here and spending some time hanging out on this beautiful Sunday afternoon. So fear. Right now we're in, where are we? Start of July 2020, and fear is just being rife everywhere. It's being manufactured, it's being instilled, and it feels like there's kind of a lot of really big monsters around at the moment. And I felt like it would be a good opportunity to just get in contact with the fear on all levels and finding ways that we can utilize it as a tool and also just move through it a bit. So first of all, fear, what is it? It's not actually a big, ugly monster that we need to slay. If it wasn't for fear, most of us probably wouldn't be here. So, you know, really it's the thing that helps keep us alive. It's the thing that in, you know, older times, it would have kept us out of the mouth of the big hungry bear or away from the big, you know, flesh hungry spear from the opposing tribe. Like, you know, it's kept us alive for a really long time. So we're not looking to slay it. It's more about just finding some balance with it. And, you know, at the moment, we're surrounded by unnatural fears. You know, they're beyond the scope of what is necessary to keep us alive. And the adrenal process that it creates in our body to get us out of the way of harm, that's meant to be quite a quick process, and then it's supposed to dissipate. But we're in a situation now with media, with advertising, with all sorts of things, where the fear is coming at us 24/7. So, you know, it's just kept us in overdrive. If you can imagine trying to drive around in first gear in your car all the time, it wouldn't be happy. So it's not designed to be there all of the time. So first of all, how do I know about this? I'm just going to share a little bit about my story, just so you know who I am, because some of you don't know me particularly well. So I've had a lot of fear in my life since I was a very young child. When I was 5 years old, I had a hand come through a window and touch me on the forehead, and I just screamed and screamed and screamed, and Mum thought literally someone had broken into the house and came burning down the hallway, and she said I was just white as a ghost and my hair was on end. From the age of 5 to about 9, I was terrorized constantly. My sensory input didn't match the physical reality. I would have experiences that just didn't relate, and so I had no barometer to understand what was real and what wasn't. I would have dolls blinking at me in the middle of the night. I would have bed heads suddenly shattered and wake up in the middle of the night surrounded by white clouds and smoke. Like I was just constantly bombarded with lots of odd experiences, and so there was no keeping safe in that space. And that continued into my teenage years, where I was absolutely bombarded by entities, and again had no real way to move through that. That continued into my adulthood. By then, I was lucky enough to have found cigarettes and alcohol, and they're really great for drowning out all of that stuff. Unfortunately, they don't work long term. Then 10 years ago, I suddenly developed a panic disorder that came on bang. Just sitting in a cafe, I was fine one moment, the next moment I was kind of sideways, and they called a taxi and took me to hospital, and I actually couldn't stand up. And I discovered that 50% of heart attack patients are actually having their first panic attack. It's a crazy, crazy thing. And then about 2.5 years ago, I developed this awesome neurological disorder, which has me allergic to pretty much everything, food, environment, all sorts of things. The result is basically feeling like I'm in a bag full of glass and biting ants and needles and all sorts of things. So my response to the world has been very fear-based. So I'm not through it, but I have managed to carry myself through this far using the tools that I'm going to share with you. From my own personal background, I've been working with shamanic tools, Reiki, for about 2.5 decades. Moved through theta healing, through lots of movement healing, dance therapy, that kind of work. Got into a bit of transpersonal counseling, NLP, and more recently Psych-K. So that's just to give you an overview of where I'm kind of coming from. So let's look at how fear actually manifests. So, you know, we've got the acute fears that come through as panic attacks that are actually a tripwire in the brain. And so it's not the kind of anxiety type fear where you're running through thoughts. It's actually a tripwire that just turns on the adrenal response. It's almost like a short circuit in the brain that happens. Then we do have those more chronic kind of situations of the anxiety and depression, chronic fatigue that can build up in the body, and all sorts of immunity issues. Then we've got, you know, the way that it can manifest externally through lack of money, lack of home, health issues, issues with friends, happiness, career. Like, there's so many ways that those integral fears can actually manifest. And then we've got the phobias as well, that isn't so big in my realm of understanding, but just to acknowledge that that's there as well. And so if we look at what fear actually is, I mean, it is basically the instinct that keeps us safe in a healthy situation. And one map that I've kind of developed that might be helpful, by the way, this is just my experience. If this speaks to you, awesome. If it doesn't, just throw it away. It doesn't matter. It's just purely one point of view. But what I like to think of is kind of a trifecta of emotions, where you've got the anger kind of at the top or the surface, that is the reaction of actions, and the actions that lead to our needs not being met. And so if you think of that in the body, you could see that it manifests as things like heat and inflammation, fire, rashes, swelling, expanse. It's that pushing out. And then the fear is almost the exact opposite of that, which to me responds more to the consequence of those actions of those needs not being met. And so you could see that as more of a contraction, a cold, blockages, cramps, more of that internalization. And then both, if you go from anger then down to fear and then look underneath that, then you find things like the sadness and pain and depression and hopelessness, which is more like the reaction to the actual consequence. So it's almost like that surrendered space of like, that's what I was angry about. That's what I was fearful about. Now I'm just here. And so you could see that that could manifest as things of like dampness and stuckness, being unenergized and dull and bland. So, you know, that I just like to see it as that way, to just know, you know, when an emotion comes up, to go, okay, well, where on that kind of map is it? Because quite often I find if you've got anger, really what it's pointing to is something that's sitting a lot deeper. So for instance, say someone's lost their job. And they're angry because they lost their job. So you could see that they have a fear of not having enough money, of losing prestige, of losing activity, of not having that connection with other people. And then you could see the pain as perhaps not having enough food for themselves and others. I mean, these are real fears. The pain at the lack of prestige, the pain or the depression of solitude. And then when you go back down even lower than that, and like in theta healing, we're constantly going down to find, you know, what we would say are seed programs that are really holding everything in place. Most of the time you end up getting to something like, I'm not loved, I'm not lovable, I'm worthless, and I'm abandoned, and I'm deserted. You know, most of us have, I would say 99.999% of us have some of those seed programs that are really at the core. And, you know, it takes an extraordinary upbringing to not end up with those kind of programs inherent in our body. And so, you know, maybe I could open up to you all for a moment, like, you know, so what could be the opposites of that? So say, what potentially could the opposite of anger be? Feel free to either turn on your microphones or to type in the chat if you have any thoughts around this. So for me, if I think of the opposite of anger, well, to me, it's like an acceptance of a situation, or a surrender to a situation. Can anyone else like think of anything like something that might make you angry, and what could potentially be the opposite response to that?
I would like to say something. Yes. Obviously, for me, the obvious direction away from the fear is, of course, acceptance, and being heard and communicating. Even if we aren't heard in our communication, if we hear ourselves of what we are stating, we create like unification with ourself, with our source, with our direction and where we are going, like we have named it.
Yeah.
And from there, we can be in a place of clarity, whether it's forming new friendships, new identity, moving away from what doesn't serve us into a sphere that does. So often just speaking, even like a prayer out loud in our own space, can help create that sense of clarity. But also, if it's with ourselves that we feel angry, the surrender in that place, that's where often the miracles happen, where we release the emotion through crying, through screaming, yelling.
Yeah, absolutely.
And yes.
Yeah, and I hear you, especially on that naming it. You know, as soon as you've identified something, then you're already halfway through to moving through it. Yeah.
Yes. Yes. Yes.
Thank you. Well put.
Thank you.
And yeah, and as you mentioned, you know, the opposite of fear could be the trusting of the outcome. The opposite of, say, pain and sadness could potentially be, you know, joy and gratitude of the moment, of the lessons. So we'll be going into an exercise to look at that a bit deeper shortly. And so it can also help to just get a sense of where our deep-seated fears actually come from, because they do come from so many different areas. So, you know, we've got our ancestral fears that can be very deeply ingrained in our body, and we can be completely unconscious of them, but they can be playing out in lots of different ways. So for me, sometimes I've, you know, tried to shift things through various processes, and they just keep coming back. And it's not till I clear the ancestral lines that the clearance actually sticks. And then a lot of you would probably be aware of the idea that we're essentially programmed from the age of from the age up until 7, like that. They call that our formative years, where pretty much our relationship to ourselves and to the world is generated, and then everything else is a reflection of that. And so, you know, so that can manifest in many, many different ways. And then we've got stuff from past lives, if you believe in past lives, that, you know, there's lots of patterns that we can have generated over millennia. And whether you believe that there are past lives or not, or if you believe that we follow, you know, a linear set of lives, or that we simply have the ability to tune into many different life forms at different linear times, there's all sorts of patterning there that we can carry through as well. And, you know, one thing that we became aware of doing theta healing is that there's some programs that it's just our spirit decided to have a particular experience before it even came into the body. So there's, and somebody can't get sound. Who's that? Sorry to hear that, Kat. I'll make sure you message me so I can send you the recording. She probably couldn't hear that either. I will have to message her. So yeah, so there's some things that we want to help people move through, but, you know, perhaps it's their actual sole purpose that they go through particular trials and tribulations, and we actually just can't, we can't do anything about that. And so, you know, for me, as someone who facilitates other people to do their own healing, it can be kind of frustrating, and we've got to make sure that we keep ourselves clear and not trying to fix everyone, because it can be easy to kind of shift into that mode as well. So one thing that I like to think of when it comes to fear and anger, and I kind of put those in a very similar category as far as working through it, because like I said, one just feels like a slightly deeper version of the other. And I tend to think of it as like a glass of water, or say a glass, and you fill it up drop by drop. And if every single negative experience, every trauma, like if every single thing you think of as a drop of water, it can take weeks, months, years, decades for that glass to fill up. But some of you might have experienced in yourself or in others the scenario where there's that one drop of water, that one tiny little experience, that one little interaction that bang, just sends someone off the deep end. And it's because it's just the straw that broke the camel's back, basically. And so a lot of these processes, even if there's not necessarily any triggered fear or anger or anything like that currently, it can still be helpful to actively start to drain that glass of water, so you have almost more of a fuse. You know, it just gives you a bit more space. And before I started doing, you know, a lot of process work, I said to a kinesiologist once, I don't have a short fuse, I just don't have any fuse. It's just like, bang, I'm done, I'm triggered, I'm there. And so, you know, it can be just give you a little bit of breathing space to allow that breath, that space to just sit in stillness before getting to that reactivity, and being able to have a sense of being able to look at the reaction and go, wow, that thing just triggered something in me, and being able to look at it without just getting into that abrasive, fiery kind of state, or however it manifests. So, and looking at just how then that is activated. So if you think we've got all of the drops of water, then what are the things that actually trigger those or set it off? So, you know, we've got all sorts of fears that are brought in from, say, family. We've got to play within certain rules. We have certain ideas and patterns around money, health, crime, politics, success, you know. And the same with social. We've got to wear those clothes, play that music, have that money, be part of that religion, or you're not part of the cool club. Like, you know, that's just more in our experience. But then looking at the media, I mean, we've got fear of war, crime, aliens, famines, financial crashes, viruses, global warming, disaster. Like, we've got all of these things constantly coming in that aren't actually necessarily part of our immediate environment. So that's really new for our psyches. We've got advertising telling us, you know, you're not enough, you're too fat, you're too thin, you're too poor, you're too little, you're too dumb, you're too much, you're too everything. And unless you buy this thing, you're worthless. And we've got education system that says conform or fail. That's basically what we've been told. There's just not really any space for it as far as I can see. And we've got the medical and pharmaceutical industries telling us check for this, check for that. You've got no right to birth, to natural trial birth. You've got no inherent ability to heal yourself. Just give us your bodies and we will tell you what to do with them. And so we're very cut off from our own inherent wisdom. Our bodies know how to heal themselves and our bodies want to be healthy. All we need to do is get out of the way and let them do their thing. But we've been told for a really long time that your bodies can't do the thing. And so we've kind of, you know, and when I say we, I mean us as a collective in the West, have essentially just given our responsibility away and said, right, I've got this sore thing, make it go away, cut it out, give me a pill to make the pain go away so I can still keep doing the thing. Instead of turning inwards and going, okay, how am I preventing my own body heal itself? You know, we've just been taught to do it all completely opposite. And, you know, unfortunately, well, this is my little red pill hat coming out. Unfortunately, a lot of these situations have come about deliberately to create more money for the big guys and to bring everyone into control. Because if we're all cut off from ourselves, cut off from our wisdom, dumbed down and tuned into fear, it makes us very malleable. So I'm not going to go any deeper into that. If you want to look deeper into that side of things, in Spiral Out Loud, number 11A is our section on health and how it's controlled. But that's not for this conversation. And there's also other elements that can affect fear, such as, I mean, there is, you know, basic chemical imbalances in the brain that can happen where, you know, your system's not generating enough serotonin and things like that, melatonin to help you sleep. You know, we've got all of these different chemicals that do regulate our emotions and our mental state and our general well-being. So, you know, so it's not all necessarily external. But on saying that, being in a constant state of fear, you know, it creates cortisol in the body. It can create such a sense of stress in the body that the digestive system essentially sort of starts to shut down, and we can't get the nutrition that we need in order to equalize things. So it can kind of be, you know, a little bit of a roundabout circle that keeps perpetuating itself. And, you know, if you look at things like Chinese medicine, well, they see blockages in the body and similar to other forms of body work. So, you know, it's believed from that point of view that our cells actually hold the memories in them. I just went and had massive body work last night and it just completely undid me. It's amazing how much fear and trauma we actually hold physically in our bodies. And then we've got other things like molds, bacteria, heavy metals in the system, diet. You know, all of those things can then activate that fear response in us. So it's kind of quite broad. Then if we look at the effect that it can have on us. So I'm just going to give you a cute little story because this is, you know, that thing of feel the fear but do it anyway. Well, it doesn't always work. And so I decided to take off on a road trip. I just gave up my entire world about 15, 20 years ago and got rid of a factory. I used to be a costume maker. I just sold everything, moved into my little van and took off up north. And I thought, you know what, I'm going to be really daring. This is before smartphones. And I'm just not going to use a map. Whoa. So I took off, and I was halfway sort of around the Gippsland area, and I just saw this little side street, and I thought, I'm just going to be really daring, and I'm going to go down that side street even though I don't know where it is. So I took off up this road, and the sun's beaming in from my left, and I'm driving and driving and driving, and then gradually the sun's moving behind me, and then gradually the sun's moving around to my right. And after about an hour and a half, I wound up exactly where I started. So, you know, to me, it was just a perfect example of, if we have inherent fears about not being able to trust ourselves, we will make them manifest even if we think we're doing something different. So it's really helpful to be able to clear those fears to begin with. And if we think physically in the body, you know, before we talked about constriction and things like that. So if you think of fear in the body, it constricts, it contracts, it creates blockages, it can affect our decisions, it can stop us doing things, and it creates that sense of lack. It can slow down our digestive system, it can create headaches, it can create all sorts of things to keep us still and to keep us contracted and to keep us small. And you know, we know that social anxiety is huge. It's a massive problem. It's certainly been part of my world for a long time, and I'm surprised by how many people in my world really suffer from it as well. And you know, that can create absolute paralysis. And you know, I'm pretty sure that on some level, the neurological condition that I managed to bring on a few years ago was actually really brought about by a paralysis, because it's literally forced me to sit in my room and not really get out because I'm allergic to most external environments. So, you know, it can manifest in really crazy ways. So the psychology can then shift into the physiology. And so that's what I'm hoping that I can help people to get through, is to shift the fear before it does settle into the body like that. Now, even as far as physical manifestation goes, can I just get a thumbs up? Has anyone heard of Bruce Lipton, the biology of belief? Do you know that work? Yeah. So you know, he talks about the fact that we've got the same amount of genes as like a prehistoric worm, but it's just the difference in environment that creates different expressions of the genes. So we're not these hugely complicated creatures. We've just created different environments for the different cells to then have different expressions. And so, you know, so those cells are constantly listening. And when you think that most of our body is water, you're probably familiar with Dr. Omosho's work about you know, putting different emotions on water and then creating the water crystals before and after and seeing the difference of them. You know, if you think that just thinking like love or hate or fear or anger or whatever the thing is on water can shift it physically that dramatically, just imagine what fear is doing to our bodies as far as that genetic expression goes in the cells. So, you know, so it can really go quite deeply. And then just lastly, for this little section, just thinking of what effect it actually has on the external world. So, you know, when you think that everything that we experience is a reflection of our inner world, 25 years ago, well, 20 years ago, I used to make costumes for exotic dancers. And so my weekends were spent walking down King Street in Melbourne from about 10 o'clock at night till about 4 o'clock at night with 2 huge suitcases full of about 40 kilos worth of costumes and a lot of money, and surrounded by very, very drunk men from all sorts of scenarios. And I never, ever, ever felt hindered or anything. And I'm sure that it's because I just wasn't afraid. And part of that was I actually just felt like a porcupine, that I had all of these quills that were just surrounding me. And, you know, it's not difficult to kind of push the energy out, which is what I was doing, rather than let the energy go in. When you think of the direction of energy, anytime that I'm feeling anything coming in that's making me want to constrict and contract, I just immediately push it out. You know, even just walking past someone on a street, sometimes there's anxiety there, which if anyone's got social anxiety, you'll know what I'm talking about. Even just feeling like, there's someone coming towards me and feeling that constriction, if you just turn that out the other way and just send them some love, it can just relax that. So, you know, there's a lot of play that can come just from being aware of that. And the last little bit on this is that some of you have read the work that I've been doing with Nonna, or Auntie Jude, who's a beautiful spirit that I work with. And I've been basically transcribing her words for a few years now. And she's been speaking recently about what she calls the hungry ghosts, which are basically, they're kind of like ghosts, but they're a bit more unconscious than that. And she also talks about, you know, most of us are aware at the moment of what's being uncovered globally as far as, you know, trafficking and ritual sacrifice and all of that kind of stuff. We don't need to go into it. But just considering the so-called monsters that are behind all of this, it's easy to be angry and to send hatred to them. But one thing that Auntie Jude was saying is that a lot of people are just hardwired that their cells can actually only feed on dark energy. Whereas, you know, we generally are doing our best to be able to feed ourselves with light energy. If our fear bodies, and this is something I haven't quite tapped on actually, and I'm going to step to that first. I think of fear as a body. I think of anger as a body. I think of love as a body. All of these different things, I feel like we have all of these different bodies. Which one do we want to feed, or which ones do we want to feed? Which wolf do you want to feed? So she says that, you know, a lot of these people, they've just been so programmed from childhood or often from birth or before that they can only feed on fear. And so now with the earth shifting and the frequency shifting, that all humans are shifting and their bodies are now needing to actually start feeding on love. But if you have a system that can only feed on fear, those cells are going to starve for a while. It's almost like when you're trying to train your body out of living on carbs to living on fat, it takes the body about 3 weeks to be able to understand how to get the energy out of fats if it's been trained to get energy from carbs, because carbs is the first place it goes because it's easier. So similarly, for a lot of people, if their, you know, systems are just hardwired to feed on darkness, on hatred, on fear, doesn't matter how much love you send them, they're still going to feel like they're starving. And for a while, they will. So if you consider, if someone's hardwired to feed on fear and anger, what are they going to put into the world when they feel hungry? They're just going to keep attacking and trying to create more fear and trying to create more anger. So I'm finding it, you know, it can be challenging, but I'm finding it really, really important to separate the person from the behavior. And that, you know, as all of these atrocities and stuff are being uncovered, to not hate the people, because if we do that, we just keep feeding the monster side of them. Whereas if we can send them light, although it will start to starve them for a while, if we keep on doing that, eventually their cells will start to reprogram in order to be able to almost like have receptors for love. Not all of them will. I mean, you know, as from where I stand, some people are just too far gone and they have just done too much and they might just starve. that's partly their soul covenant as well. But we're seeing so much stuff in the media around the thing that shall not be named, because otherwise YouTube won't let this play, but we all know what's been going on for the last few months. There is just so much fear and so much anger being perpetuated, and it's just not helpful. So you can go, yeah, I don't agree with that, but where am I going to send my energy? What am I going to feed? What do I want to generate? And so, Auntie Jude was saying, I was going for a walk down at the local river, and I looked up and saw one of the new towers being put in. And my first reaction was like constriction. And then I went, no, hang on, relax, send it love. Imagine it's a giant tree, just to try and transmute that energy a bit. So I just thought that was a little bit of an interesting thing that she shared with me. So before we start getting into the next bits about how we can shift it, is there anything that anyone feels like they want to add? Any thoughts that anybody has regarding any of those things? No? Yes? Yeah. Hi.
Fear for me is kind of like the absence of love. It's sort of, we become attached to a persona, an egoic persona personality that we've created through society, conditioning, upbringing, that we consider to be ourselves, which isn't necessarily connected to the authenticity of who we really are. So, and this egoic persona is because it has to defend itself, because it's not necessarily connected to the essence of our being, this love, is always on the defense, always fearful, and the whole object of life is to we need to develop that, our ego, but we also need to go back to the source of who we really are, our true essence, the true nature of our being, which is love, which is source, which is God or universe, whatever you want to call it, and that part of ourselves, there is no fear. The fear can't exist on that level, and that's where we're heading, and that's where we need to work on shedding the layers of illusion that we've created and identified with and associate with, to realize that they're not real, they're not really who we are, and to re-establish ourselves with the authenticity of our true inner nature, our true self. And then there's no fear. There's just love. There's just love.
Yeah, I hear you.
That's my journey. Yeah.
It is. Thank you.
Yes.
So,
can I just add something quickly
please.
to turn my attention back to the camera, the screen with the camera. So something that a couple of actually just before I share this little bit, it was interesting about the formative years, because I hadn't heard that before about 0 to 7, but I had delayed cognitive and physical development for a number of reasons, and most milestones were delayed by a year or two. Wow. And when I was 30, I lost a job, which I had actually had a premonition about. Everything played out exactly as I had seen that morning in my meditation. But nonetheless, even though on some level I was being prepared for it, the next morning I couldn't move. I couldn't get out of bed. My back had completely seized up. And a kinesiologist took me back to when I was 8 years old, to a lot of fear around not being able to complete my schoolwork because of the cognitive development problems that I didn't know then. I didn't know until I was 30. So it was interesting that kind of coinciding with the knowledge that I had those challenges when I learned about it when I was 30, and then I lost a job at 30, and then a kinesiologist was able to take me back to a very clear memory of hiding my uncompleted work in my little grade 3 desk for fear that I'd be found out. And once she cleared that, I went and home and slept for 24 hours and got up and moved quite freely.
Amazing.
And then at that age, then I was going to India and spending time with my guru. And because of the 8 weeks that I spent there, I developed an enormous fear of the change that would occur when I got back to Australia. And I kept saying to a kind of like a social worker, all this upheaval, all this upheaval, all this upheaval is going to happen when I get back to Australia, because I won't be a drinking idiot like I was or whatever, and I'll lose all my friends. And that person guided me through a process of rethinking my my relationship with the change that would happen. And it went from becoming, it's the same hand movement, it went from upheaval to upliftment. And so by the time I left the ashram back in 1994, I was looking forward to the change, because I was anticipating all this positive upliftment was going to happen in my life. So it was a massive paradigm shift in my consciousness. And that is one of the experiences I've had in life, which has served me time and time and time again. And when I have this sense of upheaval, I just remember that and just shift my thinking, really. Yeah.
Beautiful. Thank you. Thanks for sharing. Thanks everyone for sharing. That was lovely. So let's look at how we can do it better. We've talked about all the nasty bits. How can we shift it? So to me, it's about basically developing a constructive relationship with it. I mean, it can be incredibly helpful if we're not completely controlled by it. And, you know, it's a natural pattern in humans to move away from that which causes us pain and to move towards that which causes us pleasure. So it's a natural thing to want to avoid it. It's just, you know, when everything just keeps adding and adding and adding, we just don't get a chance to empty that glass. So sometimes we kind of need to go through a bit of junk in order to get to the other side. One way I love to think of it, I can't remember who gave me this image, but it was years ago and it was brilliant. She said, you know, you've got your roasting pot after your good old fashioned Sunday afternoon roast, and the thing's all covered in junk. And then you soak it. And after you've soaked it for a while, then you see all the bits of fat and crap just start to come away from the edge, you know. And then you get out your scourer and you start scrubbing, and you've just got this ungodly mess. But you've got to do that before you scrub it clean. So I just always think of that, and sometimes I definitely feel like a massive pot full of just disgusting stuff, but I know that it's just part of moving through that. So let's look at how we can actually be guided by fear. For me, the first thing to do when I'm feeling fearful is to just stop distracting myself. You know, it can be so easy to go, this is uncomfortable, I'm going to watch Netflix or go for a run, or like, you know, just do something. But sometimes the best thing we can do is to just be still and just put everything off. And just to dig down and just really get a sense of what's going down. And if you're not used to that, it can be incredibly uncomfortable. But it's like anything, the more you do it, the easier it is. And the more you get used to that odd feeling and then go, but if you just sit with it for a while, simply giving anything your attention can, you know, just like before, David, you spoke about just naming the thing, just giving the thing the attention can then help to just dissipate it. And one of the classic questions is, well, what's the worst thing that could happen? You know, I'll lose my job. Well, what's the worst thing that can happen? I don't have any money. What's the worst thing that can happen? I end up homeless on the street. Well, what's the worst thing that can happen? I die. Well, what's the worst thing that can happen? I don't exist. Well, what's the worst thing that can happen? I'm just empty. I'm just empty. I'm just like, and if you just keep going down in your own level of self-inquiry, you can very quickly get down to like what's really going on. And once you do that, it can be not quite so scary. So one of the things that I like to do, I'm sure everybody here knows or has heard of the law of attraction. I personally don't really like the term because it feels a little bit kind of, what's the word, superficial, I guess. But I do still get this sense of it as what it's supposed to be, as opposed to just the think happy thoughts and you'll make lots of money. But perhaps we could do just a quick little practice at the moment. So if you could just think of a fear, just any fear. It might be monumental, it might be really small. And so if you think of a fear, sometimes what they can actually do is to help us formulate what it is that we want. Because sometimes a fear can exist just because we're a little bit lost and cloudy and unfocused, and just in that space we can just end up with that weird kind of anxiety. So we can actually use a fear in order to generate like a positive response. So for instance, you know, for me, if I think, well, I am afraid that my business is going to fail and I won't be able to make any money. So if I'm feeling that fear, I think, okay, so what I want to bring in as an antidote to that is a sense that it is successful, and what does that feel like? And so we'll get a little bit more into that shortly. But perhaps I might invite you, if anyone would actually like to share something around this. You don't have to, but if you like to, you can. What is a fear that you can imagine, and you can even make it up if you want, and what is the polar opposite of that you could bring in as an antidote?
Last. But to me, one of my fears is morbid ill health. And so the antidote to that is that I'm a vibrant being, a vibrant, healthy well-being.
Yeah.
You know, a person who's basically just got lots of energy and finds exercise and health and so forth is just my daily experience, to the extent that I don't even think about it.
No.
For me, the fear of losing my sense of sovereignty, as a lot of us have discussed in these recent times, it's like a fear of being taken over by an agenda, a political idea that does not serve the human spirit, our own personal identity, our diversity, which, you know, I probably can't mention his name because of censorship, but the diversity, you know, from different cultural groups to all the people in our day-to-day life, you know, from, you know, ideas being suppressed on social media platforms that go against the common mainstream media notions of how we must think. For me, a fear is that we will lose that diversity. So therefore, my antidote to this is, how do I maintain in everyday life my independent thinking, using my voice, using my actions to be an antidote, to move from a place, from that inner wellspring, which is connected to source. And whilst I maintain this, I feel okay. I feel okay. And it can only get stronger the more we are tested. So in a way, this time is like what are you choosing? Are we choosing our independence, our own thoughts, or are we swept away? And it's like an exercise, as Paul just spoke around health. Exercising every day to be stronger, to be healthy. And so I'll leave it at that.
Absolutely. Yeah, I totally hear you on that. I totally hear both of you on those. And so can you get a sense of like the visceral difference between I am feeding the body of being afraid of ill health versus I am feeding the body of vibrant, healthy being, or I am feeding the body of I'm afraid of my sovereignty being taken over versus I am feeding the body of I am an independent thinker. So we can kind of use those fears to almost create our own blueprints, our own watermarks, our own mantras, if you like, so that we know when those triggers come up, just to almost use them as signposts to remind us of the opposite of that. And, you know, and on saying that, it's not also always necessary to just gloss over it and look the other way. Sometimes we do need to go into it a little bit more, which is what we will do. But just as kind of a first step, sometimes it can be helpful to just focus on the bit that we do want, just so we can define it. And then we know, even during our process of undoing the ferocity of the fears, we know why we're doing it because we know what we're aiming towards. That kind of gives us a signpost for where we want to go. So,
Tjoni, can I add one thing just based entirely on what you just said?
Sure.
In terms of signposts, and that is that I've taken on that change of consciousness, and I haven't been in a swimming pool for 5 years.
Wow.
Because of body consciousness fears and so on and so forth. And then so last Sunday I booked in, and now I've got a membership and I'm swimming every day. And in terms of signposts and synchronicity and serendipity, the name of the pool I go to is Watermark. And
Nice.
It's one of the names that you just used in your last,
Beautiful.
So it's just like, for me, it's just, it's hearing those signs, seeing and hearing those signposts and saying, oh, that's a confirmation that I'm doing the right thing at the right time, going in the right direction. And so I just thought I'd, share that as an immediate example of that.
Beautiful. Thank you. And well done.
Thank you.
So let's look at how we can create a relationship with it. So there's quite a few different tools that I've used. One of them is, has anyone done morning pages before? Does anyone know of morning pages? She basically talks about just writing, or doing autonomous writing. So you're not thinking about what you're writing, and it doesn't need to make sense at all. It's kind of like just rinsing out that roasting pot, yeah? So you're just writing and doing 3 sides of an A4 page every single morning. You're not writing to read it. And in fact, she says, don't read any of it. Just when you filled up a book, burn it. Like, it's not there to be read. It's just there to just get rid of the stuff. And so quite often through going through that process, I find, especially if I'm in that state where there's a lot of head noise going on and I just can't have a thought, when you've just got just a whirlwind of other people's junk going on. So morning pages can be really, really helpful for that. I usually find it takes maybe 3 to 5 days to start notice a difference. And then the more I do it, the more I just find that there's absolute clarity. It's like just emptying out the brain before you then start the day. So that's a really helpful one. Another one that I've done quite a lot of is kind of similar, but just with drawing, just autonomous drawing. And I love just getting, a huge big jotter pad of watercolor paper because it's nice and solid, and and using just pastels and crayons and things like that, and to literally just start making shapes or just doing whatever you need to do just to get stuff out. It doesn't need to make sense. And sometimes incredible images come out, but sometimes it's just a mess. And sometimes beautiful images will come out and then there'll be big words and like hate and grotesque and all sorts of stuff will just start coming out. So again, you're not doing it to create an image that you want to show someone. It's just another way of getting stuff out. Similarly, in art therapy, there's sand play, where you're just literally creating and moving with sand. Anything that's creative, and especially things that are messy, even playing with clay, all of that kind of stuff, I find incredibly helpful. One of the first stories I ever wrote actually came out of kind of what turned out to be a form of sand play. And I was living at Lakes Entrance, and I just started taking my phone and making pictures and kind of almost these animations. They didn't quite work, but it was a fun exercise, just out of found objects on the beach. And one day I thought I'd do something a bit more substantial, and I took my tripod down and I just started creating this thing in the sand, and it just started off being like a mound, and then shells and stuff started going on it, and then these sticks just needed to be stuck in it, and I literally felt like I was being stabbed in the back. And I just ended up just playing with sand and shells and sticks, just having this full-on moment, bawling my eyes out on the ocean, people walking past going, what is she doing, she's just weird. But then the next day I went back to the ocean and I just spoke what that was. And it came out as this incredible story called The Turtle and the Dragon. And it was just such a momentous occasion that kind of started off my whole process of just channeled stories. So anything like that, you know, even going down next to the river and finding natural objects and starting to create out of them without any sense, it can just start to shift stuff. And, you know, when we think of things like fear and anger, like they're just patterns, they're just energy. So many of those different creative processes can just start to shift and break up that energy. And another thing, especially with around fear, is doing more kind of inner child work. Has anyone done any of that kind of work, like working with your inner child? It doesn't have to be a big process. For me, it's simply a fact of, if I'm feeling fearful, I just started doing this of just imagining myself as a 7-year-old child in front of me. And literally just saying to that child, what do you need from me right now? As simple as that. And the child might just say, I just need a hug. And so just purely the process of soothing, imagining that creature can actually start to settle something. And so for me, that has shifted until that inner child just kind of made her way in here. And so she literally lives in my heart chakra. And so sometimes when I'm feeling really afraid of things externally, rather than me just going, oh my God, I feel afraid, I'll just tune into her and put my hands over my heart and just imagine that I'm giving her a cuddle. And it's incredible how much that can shift. And when you consider, you know, we were talking about the formative years before, it's really tapping in back to those patterns of tapping back into our own formative years and addressing the fears that were created back then and starting to soothe them, because we're not bound by time. You know, when we're doing this kind of work, it's all timeless. So working with your inner child now, it will make a shift now. Now, on that note, let's do another little exercise. So this one's going to go a tiny bit deeper, but we're not going to go too deep at the moment. This is called focusing. Has anyone heard of focusing in relation to transpersonal counseling? Yeah, you have, Liz? Cool. So, yeah, you have too, David? Yeah. So it's a process that was created by a man called Eugene Gendlin. I think that's how you say his name. I'll put a link to his work anyway. And it's basically a way of creating a dialogue with something that's going on, whether it's emotional, whether it's a relationship, whether it's work, whether it's an illness. Like, it doesn't really matter what it is. Anything that we need to explore, you can use focusing for. So I'll invite you, maybe before we just brought up a little fear. So if you like, you can maybe work with that. If there's something else you want to work with, feel free to. I would suggest, because this is just a little exercise and we're online, that you don't go into anything too horrendous. That would be something to do in a proper session. But just something that's you know, easily workable with. And I'm going to invite you to close your eyes. So if anyone would prefer to turn your cameras off, you're welcome to. Otherwise, feel free to just close your eyes, and I'm going to turn my voice into counseling mode now. So we'll just do this for about three minutes, and this is just to give you a little bit of sense. So I'm just going to invite you to close your eyes and just bringing to mind the sense that you would like to work with. Perhaps it's a fear, perhaps it's an anger, perhaps it's a sadness, perhaps it's a situation. Whatever it is, just allowing that to come to mind. And as you do that, I invite you to just gently, with open curiosity, scan through the body and just notice if there's a part of the body that is speaking to you right now. You might notice a pain or some kind of sensation, or you might just have a general sense that there's a part of the body that needs to speak now. And when you find that part of the body, I'll just invite you to sit with it for a moment. You can thank it for coming into your awareness. We're not trying to fix anything, just allowing it to be. And perhaps you could notice if there's some colour to that part of the body, to that sensation. What colour might it be? And perhaps you might notice if that part of the body, that sensation has a shape. And perhaps you could notice if that sensation has a temperature. Is it hot or cold? And perhaps you could notice what the quality of it is, if you could reach out and touch it. It might be soft or hard or spongy, or might feel like grass or metal or clay. Just getting a sense of the texture of it. Now, just imagining sitting somewhere safe. Maybe you're sitting on a log by the river, or sitting on the beach under the sun. Or maybe you're sitting right where you are now. And just imagine that you could sit next to that sensation, just inviting it to sit next to you like an old friend. And perhaps you could ask that sensation, what does it need from you right now? What can you offer it? Perhaps you could ask it how it would like to feel. Or there might be another question you have for it. And perhaps whatever it needs, maybe it's possible for you to offer that now. Maybe it needs a hug. Maybe it just needs some acknowledgement. Maybe it needs an agreement for you to do something. And when you're ready, just thanking that part of you for coming and spending time with you today. Reassuring it that at any time you can come back and spend more time, just giving it the love and attention that it needs. And when you're ready, bringing your awareness back into the heart center, imagining a glowing ball of beautiful, cleansing golden light. And I invite you to inhale as that ball moves up above your head, and exhale as that ball moves down below your feet. 2 more deep breaths. Inhale, bringing that golden ball back up towards the heavens. And exhale, down below the feet. 1 more inhale. And 1 more exhale. And inhaling back to center, feeling comfortable, calm, and refreshed. And when you're ready, you can gently allow the eyes to open. Welcome back. So that was a super quick little dive through. Normally something like that would take about 20 minutes or so, and we might go through a few times, but that's to give you a quick taste of focusing work. Does anyone have anything that they'd like to share about that process at this point before we go on?
My eyes are watering.
Is that a good thing?
Yeah, yes.
Good.
I touched something soft and gentle inside.
Ah, beautiful. Glad to hear it.
Thank you.
So let's look at some different ways that we can transmute fear. I would also apply this to anger, but yeah, fear is what we're working with today. So there's one, has anyone heard of Kundalini yoga? Yeah, a couple of you. Okay, so Kundalini yoga, it's a type of yoga, but it's very different to any of the, curl yourself up into a pretzel kind of yoga. It's basically using repetitive movements, so very simple, basic movements, but they're repetitive, combining that with the breath, combining that with mantras, sometimes using mudras or hand gestures. And you're repeating this over and over, and each exercise is quite specific to something or other. And so it can also be working with like the Chinese meridians with pressure points, all sorts of things. And there's a lot of very rapid breathing, so it can move through junk very, very fast. It's weird. A lot of it's just weird. Everybody who knows it knows that it's weird, but it's awesome. And the exercises that you do, or the exercise sets, are called kriyas, K-R-I-Y-A. And each kriya has a specific outcome. So you might do one for increased creativity, to boost your energy, to rest yourself in the evening, to work on detox, to strengthen the kidneys. Like, there's so many different things. There's thousands of different kriyas that you can do. And there's one particular one that I do from a lady called Guru Jagat, and it's about creating freedom from fear. And she starts off with about 10 or 15 minutes of mantra that's HOD, H-O-D, I feel like it's spelt differently, but it sounds like hod. You know, you even need to make sure that the tongue touches the right part of the roof of the mouth. Like everything's quite precise to activate different parts in the body. And so what that does is it actually really quickly moves through fear, and then you go into this kind of empowerment bit, and then you go down into sadness. So it really digs down. And for me, I particularly feel when I'm very reactive and have a lot of panic going on, that's incredibly helpful. The other one that I found incredibly helpful is holotropic breath work. Has anyone done that one? So it's basically you're joining the in and out breath. You need to do this with a facilitator, especially at the start, because it can be incredibly intense. So you're not having any pause for the in or out breath. So most of the time you're lying down on your back. Some practitioners do it differently, and it's generally done in a group. And so the breath is, and so you're constantly doing that depending on how long the sessions are, usually about an hour and a half to 2 hours. And what that does is, well, for one, as you can imagine, it completely oxygenates the body, but then you'll find the body can start to come into, I think it's called sepsi, like when the hands come up, like people that are spastic and their hands come up, it's the similar kind of lock. And the lips can also go very, very kind of weird. And that happens when the oxygen starts moving through and very rapidly breaking up all of this buildup of all of those drops of water without needing to mentally go through anything. So it can be quite intense on the body, but at the end of it, it's incredible. And also some of the more quieter versions of that can actually go very, very deep. It's quite often that people will spontaneously just start screaming and screaming and screaming. And for me, I did primal therapy, which was kind of like the granddaddy to breath work, which came out in the 70s by a man called Arthur Yanov. And that was about getting people right into the very core of their trauma and bringing them to a space of that primal scream, of that cathartic kind of state. And I was terrified of it back then. And I found that process was actually quite intellectual, and there was too much fear and fear of being judged and all of that kind of stuff. But doing the holotropic breath work, it's like it completely bypassed that. I know that there are some practitioners in Melbourne. So if I find any, I will also put that up in the links. So holotropic breath work, definitely worth it. Like we mentioned before, sometimes you've just got to get rid of the adrenaline out of the body. Dance, run, scream, walk in nature, get on the beach. Sometimes just got to go and sit by the ocean, get those beautiful negative ions into the system. Sometimes I just need to get into the car and scream my freaking head off for about half an hour. And then I feel okay. So cars are awesome for that. And if you've got some heavy metal that you can scream to, even better. And the other thing is often body work will help to get rid of a lot of fear as well. You know, before we talked about fear really creating those contractions. So if you've got, you know, cramps and knots in the muscles and things like that, body work can often release a lot of that. And another thing that's great to do is trembling or shaking. There's a great Osho meditation that's a shaking meditation. And so you literally just stand up and you just shake and shake and shake. And you can shake for an hour. And by the end of it, you're exhausted, but it just really helps to just break up any junk in the body. So that's a really cool one. And Yoga Nidra is another super helpful one, which is a guided form. You're lying on your back. And again, I'm going to put a link up for this one because it's very helpful. Has anyone done Yoga Nidra? A few yeses, few no's. So it's basically putting awareness on all the different parts of the body. And what it does is it puts the body into a state of basic sleep while the mind's still awake. and usually goes for about 20 to 40 minutes. So a very helpful thing to do, especially before lunch, just to reset the body. Now, would anyone like to do a quick little shamanic dream session? Let's do that. Before we do that, does everyone want to just get up and have a little shake for 30 seconds? We've been sitting for quite a while. It's easy to forget when I'm doing all the talking. It's actually you get quite gaga sitting in front of a computer all this time. All right, so let's just do a little quick 3-minute shamanic dream work. Now, there's a man called Serge Kahila King, and he was American, but essentially adopted by a Hawaiian family. So he lives in Hawaii, and his style of shamanic work is what I call the aikido of shamanism. So, for instance, if you come up against a big, hungry, evil monster, instead of trying to slay it, you'd probably make friends with it and end up doing a healing with it. So he calls it the way of the adventurer rather than the way of the warrior. And one of the processes he does is called dream work. And he talks about that everything has a dream. You could almost think of it as like the blueprint or the DNA of everything that happens. So every community, person, situation, item, country, universe, everything has this dreamscape. So one thing that I like to do is let's just do a quick personal dreamscape just on where we are at the moment. Now, what this does is we've got different levels of awareness according to this form of aloha type shamanism. And the ku is basically what takes information and turns it into manifest reality. The ku is the bit that goes, body needs to rest, body is not resting because person is a workaholic. What will we do? Well, there's a holiday, or no, they're not going to take a holiday. There's this cold going around. Awesome, we'll give them a cold that will force them to sleep. So it's the ku that brings possibilities in. So what we're doing with dream work is basically shifting the blueprint and going, here's another option. But we're shifting it from that abstract dream space. So you can actually do this for other people without them knowing, because you're not actually getting in and changing their wiring. You're actually just offering their ku another opportunity. All right. So, so if you like, I'll invite you to close your eyes again. So we're just going to do a quick little 3-minute thing, and then you might like to play with this again for longer, a little bit later. So with the shamanic dreaming, if you're naturally visual, you will find this easier. Not everybody is visual, so if you find this frustrating, don't worry about it. It's not the tool for you, or just stick with it. Your own sense of perception will come through, maybe in another form. Maybe it's more oral. So one thing that I like to start with is just to simply ask, what is my dreamscape now? Let's just ask for a general one. And as if a dream is being invited to show up into your space, perhaps you could notice if you get a sense of some kind of landscape. You might get a sense of some color. If you're standing on something, you might be able to reach down and touch the ground with your hands and get a sense of what it feels like. You might be able to get a sense of the air, if it's windy or still, if it's hot or cold. You might get a sense of if the area is expansive or if you're enclosed or something partway in between. You might be standing on a surface, or you might actually be submerged in something. The dreamscape can have infinite possibilities. I invite you, if you can, to just look around you. Explore the surroundings. Look at the sky or what's above you. Noticing the qualities. Maybe you're in the desert, or maybe a hillside, or maybe a room. And then I will invite you, if you like, if you feel that there is something you would prefer, something that would feel better, perhaps you could start imagining change. So if you're in a desert, perhaps you could imagine grass and flowers and trees coming up. If you're in an enclosed space, perhaps you could imagine pushing the walls away and giving you some openness. If there is cold, perhaps you could imagine some gentle warmth. If it looks grey or bleak, perhaps you could imagine some colour. Just as if somebody gave you a painting and you were to repaint it to something that felt more to your liking. And when you feel ready, perhaps you could offer that almost like a present to your KU, K-U, the part of your system that brings the dreamscape into physical, manifest reality. Just imagine offering it to it as an option. And when you're ready, I invite you to take a few deep breaths, coming back into your room. Feeling the chair and the floor beneath you. Feeling the air in the room on your skin. Taking a few deep breaths, filling the lungs with oxygen. Feeling present, centered and refreshed. And gently floating the eyes open when you're ready. So with shamanic dream work, again, you can spend quite a long time in that kind of space, and you can determine what you decide you would like to shift, Or sometimes if it feels more comfortable, you can just ask Spirit, show me what is the ideal dreamscape for this situation, for this unwellness, for this person, for this project. So, so that's something that you can use for anything, to actively change or to just trust. And it can be quite bizarre if you just ask for the ideal dreamscape and just everything starts shifting in front of your eyes. Just a few other things that I found helpful. One is essential oils, especially the really the earthy oils. Like I use a lot of patchouli and cedarwood and myrrh, like those kind of oils. I just find them quite grounding and expansive. So patchouli especially, and I know that patchouli is really good for anxiety as well. So I've got it on most of the time. Another one, sometimes you just need to shift junk. Comedy, just stand-up comedy is awesome. Nothing like a good old giggle. Rescue Remedy, if anybody's ever used that. Has anyone used Rescue Remedy? Yeah. It's a homeopathic, and even most chemists and things will sell Rescue Remedy these days. Just a handful of facilitated things that might be helpful. Acupuncture, like we mentioned before, bladder meridian is often stuck in relation to fear. So that can be a very helpful way to shift things. Theta healing is something that I've been doing for quite a long time that I find quite good. TRE, trauma release exercises, I think it stands for, is getting the body in particular poses that, you know, if you like rest on your leg in a certain way, sometimes it can tremble. So it's about getting the body into those positions where it starts to tremble. And what that does is, just like an animal when it's afraid or had a shock will start trembling, it gets your body into that same state. So again, without having to go into the psychotherapy of it, you can just move straight through it very quickly. Psyche is something that I've actually just added that to my repertoire a few months ago. And I found that to be just incredible as far as moving through fears and blockages it goes. It's basically about using muscle testing as you do in kinesiology to create a dialogue with the body, and then doing balances in order to basically drop subconscious programs straight into your brain, and it happens like that. So I found that hugely beneficial. And I'm just going to put a few links to all of these different things, like I said, in the group chat. So in the chat, I have put the YouTube, the Inspiral YouTube channel. So I've been creating podcasts, Inspiral Out Loud, and we're exploring all sorts of different things, exploring the ways, the shadow as well as the light. So this is one of the first of the more light ones. So looking into all sorts of different corners of the world and how they're manipulated in order to then look at how we can do it better. So if that interests you, please subscribe to the YouTube channel that I have popped up there. If you would like to get in touch or just stay in tune with me around writing and coaching, the Facebook, my Facebook page is up there, Tjoni. It's just Tjoni. Inspiral is up there as well, and that's for people that are interested in an intentional business community, which is basically creating ideas around intentional living communities and transferring that into business so that we can start collaborative projects and just start doing things a bit better. Then I've got the Tjoni.com, which is the website that has all of my writing and podcasts and all sorts of stuff on there. So you're welcome to subscribe there, or you can just email me directly, info@inspiral.org. That's it. Sorry, that was a bit of a marathon. I was like, oh my goodness, am I going to be able to fill up an hour?
Thanks, Tony. Really good. Really enjoyed it.
Excellent. Thank you so much for joining me, everyone. That was awesome. Really, really appreciate you being here.
And thank you so much. I got a lot out of that, and it was really great to share with a few more people. Thank you.
I'm glad that you did, and thank you for your insights as well. Thanks everyone for your insights. That was really great. Yeah.
Thanks, Tjoni. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Rachel. Good to see you.
Okay.
Thanks, everybody. Have a beautiful day.
Bye-bye. You too. Thank you.
Hi, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Thanks for your backdrop.
Mhm.